Hello, so this is part 4, or the 5th video, or the 3rd point. Um, it's, I was thinking, how do I start this? So if someone were to ask me, what is self? Uh, an answer I might give, for, as I see self, is I might say self is the collection of stories I tell about this self, that's the self. Uh, or I might say something like it's the collection of thoughts, emotions, sensations, perceptions that are all bundled together in this being that is convinced that it exists somehow as an independent entity. And so that's how I would describe self. Now, I wanted to quickly switch over to a phenomena that can be described in a number of ways, but I'll do it through example. So imagine you're walking in nature and you're walking through a dense brush or dense wooded area, and you come upon an opening, and suddenly the whole scene, you just come upon a cliffside where everything just opens up, and you're confronted or met with this beautiful sunset, for example, and you have a moment of awe. In that moment, suppose you'd been worrying or ruminating on some personal problem in your life, but right at that moment when you're beholding this beautiful spectacle of nature, it's almost like all those concerns fade away in that moment. And maybe that experience is so profound that you're shook for the next few days, or at least the next few minutes. And so one could say during those few minutes or few days, the oppression of one's worries and concerns and stories that one is wrapped up in are lifted. Another way to describe it is that the oppression of self is lifted. Sometimes when we fall in love, part of the allure, I would say, of falling in love is that the self that we know to be self becomes dissolved. Suddenly, possibilities open up that weren't there for us. All these stories again that were limiting begin to fall away. And so one could describe that as, again, the falling away of self. A more common thing that I hear is sometimes when we try to help someone else or listen to someone else less fortunate than us, and we listen attentively, there's a phenomena that people describe as getting out of self. In other words, we're getting out of, again, the oppression of all these concerns and worries and stories we have about ourselves and our lives and so on. And for a moment, or maybe for 30 minutes or 2 hours, we elude the grasp of that, and we have this experience of freedom. We get out of ourselves and we care more about the other person who's suffering significantly more than us. And I would classify all these experiences as having a very similar structure. And the similar structure is that the self either falls away, or we get out of it, or it dissolves. The flow state, I talked about that in an earlier video. When we enter a flow state, again, the constraints of self fade away, and we're more in the moment, and we're engaged with a task at hand. And it's almost like there is no I at that moment. It's just the task. It's just the action that's occurring. There is no central I that's in control of things. The I has weakened or loosened or dissolved. A word that I like to use is that the self has thinned out. And I think I would say that for most of us, or even something as mundane as this, I've had just a couple of moments in my life when I've gone to a restaurant and eaten something that was so delicately delicious, and that as soon as it entered my mouth, I heard my mind sort of went boom, and it was almost like coming upon a beautiful scenery in nature, just a awe-inspiring, but it was through the gustatory experience of taste, and I was just brought into the moment, and all the concerns, again, the self sort of dissolves away. And I'm most familiar with this in the practice of meditation, especially long meditation, as in hours carried on for days, that as one returns to meditation, this sense of self thins out, and one has these experiences of getting out of self without needing someone else there, but the mind just sort of gets out of self and lets go, and self dissolves. And what I've noticed, so I've probably observed this in my own practice thousands of times, and having observed it over and over and over and seen it, what I notice is the self dissolves, and almost instantaneously, the self tries to erect itself, tries to consolidate a new self. Now, it tries to consolidate probably the same self, but because it's already been dissolved in a moment, the new self can never be the old self. So it's a slightly different self that's being erected. And when I say a self is being erected, I'm referring to, in case that's a little abstruse or abstract to you as a listener, you might consider something like when people say, or when we say things like, I'm a morning person, or I don't like donuts, or I'm impatient in traffic, right? So I'm this, I'm that. So the mind is creating a self. It's constructing a self as I'm a morning person. And the more one says it, the more one sort of invests in it, that becomes one's reality. And pretty soon, if I'm a morning person, my pattern will probably be late at night. I'm zonked out. And I'll be like, I'm just a morning person. I can't deal with late night. As opposed to if one didn't erect that sense of self, it might be more like, well, I tend to get up early and I tend to go to bed late. But if one's forced to stay up late, one can just sort of adapt. And there isn't this extra burden of, well, I'm a morning person. Yeah. Or one can say something like, or, I talked about writing. And so I often would say, I write. But I don't know if I've ever said, I'm a writer. Because I'm a writer is a erection of self. It's a building up of self. I am this. I am angry. I am a writer. As opposed to, oh, I'm experiencing anger. Or I write. I tend to write a couple hours a day. Yeah, that's describing a set of behaviors that can change, that may end tomorrow, as I talked about. But I'm a writer. If I'm saying I'm a writer and then suddenly I can't write, it's panic time, because don't you know I'm a writer? Now what am I supposed to do with my life? What am I supposed to do with my time? I'm a writer. I can't write. Something's a problem. But on the other hand, if we don't erect a self and just say, well, I write, maybe I'll do that for the rest of my life, or maybe I'll just do it for 5.5 years, and then one day I'll stop. Then when it stops, it's like, oh, I guess it's over. So I would say the consolidation of self is a perpetual thing occurring in the mind of most human beings. And yet we have these experiences that cut through the denseness of self, where we get to experience these momentary and sometimes lasting moments of liberation from that self, or the oppression of what I've called the oppression of self. And I would include self as including all of one's likes and dislikes, all of one's fears, hopes, wishes, all the things that sort of are bundled with self. This video is already almost 10 minutes, and one of the videos went well over 15 minutes, and I thought maybe that's a bit long. So I'm going to cut this one at this point.